Kia ora and good morning. My name is Ross Young and I'd like to welcome you to a very special Google Hangouts this morning, live from Google Hangouts on Air and from Auckland, New Zealand. Today, Prime Minister John Key is hosting a hangout with students from across the country about New Zealand's national flag. We will also be joined by 3 New Zealand high schools and students from nationwide who have submitted their questions. From Cape Reinga to the Bluff and everywhere in between, we have had heaps of questions, so thank you very much. So without further ado, let me introduce the 3 schools who are joining our hangout today. Firstly, let's hear from James Cook High School in Auckland.
Hi, I'm Gabriel from Africa.
Hello, I'm Tana Hawara Manohara.
Hey, welcome. And next we have Samuel Marsden Collegiate in Wellington. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, welcome. And then let's go to Christchurch to Hornby High. G'day. Are you with us, Hornby? Are you there? Well, let's move on then as we're waiting for Hornby High. I'd also like to welcome all of the students who are watching live online and have submitted questions. Thank you very much. We have received heaps, as I said before, and that's really lovely to see. So now that we have all our schools and all of you watching, it's a great honour to welcome our Prime Minister, John Key, to talk to you all this morning. Prime Minister, welcome.
Ross, thanks very much. Can I just take this opportunity to thank Google and for making this service and facility available, and also to thank all the schools for joining us. Let me just make a couple of pretty quick opening comments, because we're going to have a hopefully wide-ranging interactive discussion. But I was very keen, as we progress this whole debate about the New Zealand flag, to really try and engage with young people. And as part of my job, I have the privilege of going around lots of schools and getting the chance to talk to some of them at Assembly and other venues that I go to. But we just thought, look, it'd be great to go out there and speak to as many youngsters as we can. We know that you are influential. We know that many of you are about to vote in your own right, and so that was really the purpose of what we're doing, and it was kind of a new, cool thing to do. So, look, if you haven't been on my Facebook site, can I recommend that you go on it, have a bit of a look. At the top of it is essentially a little video I did, which was really just talking about why I thought we should change the flag. It wasn't meant to be the most sophisticated thing in the world or cover all of the reasons and rationale, but really just a bit of an insight. But the main real reason about all of this isn't so much the flag per se. It's fundamentally about our nation, the way we perceive ourselves and the way we portray ourselves on a world stage. And I believe that currently, with our New Zealand flag, while we might love it, we don't actually use it a lot, and it's certainly not the symbol that we use if we want to demonstrate to the world how proud we are and how patriotic we are of New Zealand. And so my view's been that if we change our flag, given that this is actually our 3rd flag, and personally I support something with the silver fern on it as a preference, then my view was that New Zealanders, particularly young New Zealanders, would embrace that. They would wear the flag in the same way that we see that embedded in clothing and all sorts of things, whether you're in the United States or Canada or Australia or many other countries. So that's sort of been the perspective. Does it matter? Well, we're a small country at the bottom of the earth. It's kind of cool, I think, that we show the world that we're proud of New Zealand. I think there are great benefits as a multicultural nation, but I also think there are economic benefits as well for New Zealand. So that was the rationale. There are many, many points we can cover off, but as a starting point, thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for taking the time out to engage in what will be, I reckon, quite a interesting debate over the next few months.
Thanks, Prime Minister. That was great. Now let's go to Samuel Marsden, and let's have your first question, please.
Hello, Prime Minister. My name is Imogen, and I was wondering, American patriotism is deeply tied into their flag. Is it hoped that a new flag for New Zealand will encourage more New Zealanders to be more patriotic? And how do you expect that this might happen?
Hey Imogen, so yeah, I mean look, if you think about New Zealand, we're a small country, we're multicultural at the bottom of the world. If we want to show the world that we're proud of New Zealand and we're supporting New Zealand, we typically don't use our flag. So, for instance, there's one of the reasons that I think the major sort of sporting captains of New Zealand's code, whether it's Richie McCaw with the All Blacks or Brendan McCullum with the Black Caps or whatever it might be, have been arguing that they should change the flag, is because they say wherever they go around the world and play their sporting code, you see people waving flags of the country that they are at, except New Zealand. We don't do that, and if we wave anything, typically it's a silver fern of some sort. It's not terribly recognisable. So you may have seen Jack Tame when he was running around on 7 Sharp. He went to New York, asked 50 people what country is this flag from. Only 2 people knew, and they were Australian tourists who were on holiday there. So, I think what will happen is if we ultimately change our flag, then as young New Zealanders, you will end up having sweatshirts and hats and caps and all sorts of things which just demonstrate that you're from New Zealand and how proud of New Zealand you are. And I think that cultural shift will be very important to us over time.
Thanks, Prime Minister. And now let's go to James Cook High School in Auckland for your first question, please. Off you go.
Mr. President, Prime Minister, was the reason you decided to have a referendum on changing the current flag a way of establishing a new identity for New Zealand?
Yeah, so the reason we decided to have a referendum was it's quite possible legally, well, in fact the law is, that if we want to change the flag, all we have to do is change the Act of Parliament that controls that flag, and we need 61 votes. And we have those 61 votes. So in terms of actually lawfully changing the flag, I could probably do that arguably tomorrow. The issue is, though, that I think the flag is part of a series of matters which form our Constitution, some of which is written in the Constitution Act, some of which is implied in our Constitution through things like the Bill of Rights and other sort of acts of Parliament, the treaty clauses and Treaty of Waitangi that we have. So my view was, look, when it comes to things like the flag, the length of parliamentary term, whether we should have a president or a governor-general, all of those are constitutional matters, and I think New Zealanders should decide those, not just a majority of Parliament. So even though this has got to be the hardest way on earth of changing your flag, and I don't think any other countries tried to do it this way, I genuinely believe that the process is such that we should allow the New Zealand public to make that decision.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I think we've got Hornby High from Christchurch back with us, so let's go over to you for your first question. Welcome.
If a teenager is 18 after the first binding referendum, but before the second, are they eligible to vote for the flag?
I think the answer to that would be yes. I haven't actually technically checked, but I'm pretty sure it would be, because your status of being able to vote is that you're on the electoral roll, and when you turn 18, you're on the electoral roll. So my guess is the answer would be yes.
Great, thank you. Now we'll turn to some questions that we've received from you watching online. Thank you for those. I might actually put a couple through, because one we've sort of answered already. The first is from Burnside High School, and they ask, how will changing the flag benefit the citizens of New Zealand? And the second one comes from Leighton Blackett at Otamoteitai, apologies, College. How have leaders from other countries responded to the flag change initiative, and have their reactions been positive?
Well, firstly, hello to Burnside, because that's my old school, of course, so very nice to hear from you guys. Look, I think in terms of the benefits for New Zealand, one of the arguments you hear quite a lot about is this whole process is going to cost 26 million, and surely you've got something better to spend 26 million on, all of these kinds of arguments. And I absolutely understand the importance of that, because all of you pay tax, many of you, even if you're at school, you're paying tax. And we should be very cautious with that expenditure. On the other side of the coin, if you want to have a referendum process, then there's just a cost of engagement. Now, I think that cost will be less than 26 billion, but nevertheless, you know, it is what it is. Much of it is postage, and in a way we're paying it to ourselves because we own New Zealand Post, but nevertheless that's the situation. If you're just worried about the money side of it, and I mean, I try to think of this as a much more of a national identity issue, but if you're just worried about the finances, some years ago, back in 2013, they undertook a study of New Zealand called by a company called Brand Finance. And it was, believe it or not, called Flying the Flag, but it wasn't very much to do with the flag. And what they did was they looked at the brand value of New Zealand. They said, what's the sort of goodwill brand value of New Zealand? And it was well over $150 billion. But what they said was there were a couple of areas where we could do more. One was around cultural identity, and the second thing was really around sort of awareness of New Zealand. So if you think about the silver fern as an example, we've been using the silver fern actually long before we had this current flag back in the 1800s. The silver fern's been the symbol that nationwide and globally is linked to New Zealand. And so the point would be if we changed our flag, we had the silver fern on it, and then we put that on a range of products from lamb chop packaging to, I don't know, anything else that you might think. Given that the image of New Zealand is such one of high quality and trust, what would that be worth? Well, the answer's got to be billions of dollars. So I think if it's just an economic argument, you know, you can defeat that. What do other countries think? It's very common for countries to change. So even though we don't tend to think about it, the Herald in Auckland had a story they ran a wee while ago, and they showed 20 Commonwealth countries in the last 20 years. Of them, 17 had changed. Only 3 hadn't, us, Australia, and someone I can't remember. And the point also is that it's while it's very common to change, it doesn't mean that you have to go away from being a Commonwealth country. So in 1965, Canada changed its flag. Their flag used to be very similar to ours, red with the Union Jack in the corner, has symbol on it, but actually pretty much very similar to ours. They're still, you know, very much Commonwealth country, the Queen is the head of state, all of those things, but they now have arguably one of the most readily identifiable and I think much loved flags around the world, and I think we could do the same.
That's great. Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I think we'll head back to Samuel Marsden for your second question. Over to you guys.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I'm Lily. And given the initial strength of the push to change the flag, have you been surprised by the general reaction of New Zealanders to the referendum?
Look, when we first went down this process of thinking about this, I wasn't the first Prime Minister, by the way, to think about changing the flag. If you go all the way back, Norman Kirk was Prime Minister talking about changing the flag, then David Longley, then Helen Clark, now me. So it's been a debate that's been around for a long period of time. I always thought that there would be people that would say, look, Granddad fought under this flag type of argument, and I can cover that off in further questions if you want. But that I always thought that there would be some attachment, and so change would be quite difficult. Probably there's been a slightly more resistance than I thought, and actually, in a funny kind of way, initially from young people, although I think they are quite open to change if you make a strong enough argument with them. So I suppose I have been a little bit surprised. We have got to be the only country in the world trying to change our flag through this process. So if you look at Canada, just as one example, when they changed, they just said, I'm going to change their flag, and they got up and did it. In Fiji at the moment, Frank Bainimarama's declared he's changing the flag, but he's just doing it Frank's way, which is saying, here's your new flag. So probably no one has gone down the process we're going through. And inertia is an amazing factor. You know, people are conservative, and maybe that's a very good thing. But the main point I'd make is, if you look at Canada, just put your mind back and say, okay, I'm living in Canada since 1965, just before the change of flag. There would have been a lot of Canadians not wanting to change. Show me a single Canadian on the planet now that would want their old flag back. And it'll be like that in New Zealand. If we change 6 months later, after we've changed, New Zealanders will embrace it. They'll actually use it. It'll be of great benefit to our country, and people will forget all of the arguments which are holding them back from changing. But you've got to get through that process first to do that.
Thanks. Now let's move to James Cook, hi in Auckland, for your second question.
Hi James. Will the flag represent change the unity between the British Crown and New Zealand? Is the flag the new flag designs do not recognise the Union Jack.
Could I just get you to repeat it? Sorry.
Will the flag change the unity between the British Crown and New Zealand, as the new flag designs do not recognise the Union Jack?
Yeah, okay, no, look, from a legal perspective, that relationship, I suppose, was formed when we became a British colony, and that legal basis, if you like, is the Queen as head of state. New Zealand is a constitutional country governed by a constitutional monarchy. That doesn't change, and actually that will never change, but, well, of course New Zealand could become a republic, but in my view it's not going to change in a hurry. But the point will be the history of New Zealand and our relationship with the British as our settlers. That's never going to change because that's our history. But interesting enough, if you take, say, Auckland is a good example, just to give you a sense of how multicultural we are and whether the current flag really, represents who we are in modern New Zealand. 44% of people born in Auckland were not born in New Zealand. Now, we are the second most multicultural city in the world behind Vancouver. So, even though we think of Britain and sort of the colonisation as being, the sort of big link, if you like, actually in the modern world, while we still have British migrants coming to New Zealand, we have large numbers coming from Australia, coming from China, India, the Pacific Islands, Europe, all around the world. And I think if you asked, that multicultural audience, what's the symbol of New Zealand, without doubt, in my view, be the silver fern.
Thanks. Good question, James Cook. And now over to Hornby High School in Christchurch for your second question, please.
Good morning, I'm Georgia. My second question is, why was the Māori flag not considered to be the national flag of New Zealand?
Yeah, so we've had 3 flags in New Zealand's history so far, and we may potentially well have a 4th. I mean, there are a variety of reasons why they settled on the current flags that they've got, in terms of the one that we have today. That was in 1902, I think, when that was the case. I mean, in terms of what our options would be to change, if you're saying, why wouldn't we, for instance, have taken, a Māori flag now, I guess that was ultimately came down to the panel, who were a group of independent experts who looked at all of the options, all of the 10,500 submissions that were put in, and decided in the end on in their case, the 4, and ultimately we added the 5th with Red P, of ones that we thought New Zealanders should consider. So they looked at a whole range of factors, and in the end came up with their recommendations.
Thanks, Hornby. And now we'll go to a couple of questions we've received from email from you watching. The first is from Buller High School, which asks, how do you think and not think how the current flag represents our New Zealand national identity as a whole? And the second question is from Makaurau College, and they ask, are you using this to create a legacy for yourself?
Okay, so I want to take them in reverse order. So if you think about the legacy argument, I kind of hear that a little bit on, social media runs that story a wee bit. So by definition, anything you do as Prime Minister forms part of the history or journal of history of the things that you do. Personally, I happen to think, having been Prime Minister now for 7 years already, when people and the historians write the history of my government, changing the flag, if that's what happens, won't be at the top of that list. I think without doubt it'll be economic leadership. Yesterday you saw us get the books back in order, and that's quite a remarkable feat for a developed country. I think they will look at things like the way that we stood behind Christchurch, for instance. They will look at a huge number of social changes that we've made. They may even look at things like putting the Kermadec, which is massive in terms of becoming a marine sanctuary. It's twice the land mass of New Zealand. It's the size of France. It's 50 times larger than any national park New Zealand's ever created. So I think those sort of things will be legacy. Why don't I think changing the flag will be? Well, let me just give you one simple example. No one probably can remember very few people anyway, who the Prime Minister of Canada was in 1965 when they changed their flag, just as one example. And very few people probably can remember who was Prime Minister in 1902 when we changed last time. Interestingly enough, you may have seen this little thing where they interviewed Justin Bieber, who thought we should keep our flag, That's because Canada always kept his flag. Justin Bieber didn't even know they had changed their flag in Canada. So the point being, in years to come, your generation of New Zealanders will certainly remember if we changed, that we had another flag and we've gone to a new one. Your own children may or may not know that, depending on whether they spend much time looking at these issues. But what you'll remember is that we changed. I doubt you'll actually remember I was the Prime Minister, and certainly your children won't. So if I was simply doing this as a legacy for my government, I better pick something else, because this isn't going to be the thing that will be memorable.
Thanks, Prime Minister. And now let's head back to Samuel Marsden in Wellington. Do you have another question you'd like to ask?
Yes. Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Nikiri, and I was wondering that if the flag does go ahead, what other costs are likely to be incurred beyond the referendum?
Hey, Nikiri, there'll be a range of costs. I mean, so for instance, I was in Iraq 2 weeks ago. The military wear, the New Zealand flag. Often, it's very small, but they have it on the uniforms, and they're on Velcro, so they have to rip those off. Obviously, we have it on public buildings. I mean, there's a range of costs that would be incurred. On the scheme of things, they'll all be relatively small. So, as I said earlier, there's a bit of an argument around cost that people say around the cost of the referendum, but firstly, we should celebrate the fact that we live in a democracy, and democracy has a cost that comes to it. Because you can make the same argument around general elections. I mean, I've won 3 general elections now. Every single one of them, I've been massively ahead in the polls. And so the argument could have been, well, why bother having a general election if that's the argument you want to put forward? And I just think that we live in one of the strongest and actually longest unbroken democracies in the world. And actually we should celebrate the fact that as part of a democracy, our citizens get the right to actually engage in really important issues. And this is an important issue where they should be entitled to have a view on this and to exercise their view. But as I said, if you just want it on a money cost argument, then the cost, the economic benefits of changing will dwarf anything going the other way. Because to give you an example, I mean, we have a very high international rating for the safety of our food, the quality of our food, the security of what we do, all of those kinds of things. So if our national flag is tied up in some way with what we put on our products, consumers around the world are much more likely to buy those. To give you one example of that, my wife, if she was to go and buy maple syrup because our kids wanted pancakes or something, she would almost certainly turn over the bottle, and if it had a Canadian flag on the back of it, the maple leaf, she's almost certainly going to buy it. Why? Because her perception is, I don't know, Canada makes great maple syrup, and it's the kind of well, America, the home of pancakes, so she's going to buy that product, and it'll drive consumer behaviour. So there's no doubt we'd make money out of it, but personally, I kind of think it cheapens the process to think that's why we do that. It's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to promote New Zealand, and because I think we can, as a multicultural country, really do a much better job of showing that pride and patriotism through a new national symbol.
Thanks, Samuel Marsden. And now let's have another question from James Cook High in Auckland.
Hi, I'm Gary from Alpico. My question is, I heard that you mentioned representing a modern New Zealand. So my question is, are we represented as one people through these designs, or are we represented as one side during the koru pattern design?
Well, I think people always see a variety of different things in any kind of flag, and that's actually part of the process that we're going through, is for people to have a chance to say, as an expression, what of the currently new alternatives is the one that they best believe represents the values and principles that underpin our country. And in some people's case, they'll say, for instance, with Red Peak, they'll say, okay, yeah, it doesn't have the koru and it doesn't have the silver fern on, but it's they see something in it and a representation of a New Zealand and a symbol that they would want people to see and understand as New Zealand. And that's a very valid argument. I personally don't support it as the flag I'd like to see us change to, but I can understand why people would. I mean, go and have a look at the French flag, for instance. I mean, you know, there's a rooster on it. I mean, but we all understand it to be the French flag. So you don't have to have your national symbol. You know, will the Koru get there? I mean, you know, because of the indigenous culture of New Zealand, I don't know. Again, that'll be for New Zealanders to decide. But I think in a way, you know, one of the reasons why I quite like the Kyle Lockwood designs is I do think that they have a bit of everything in there. The silver fern is, you know, obviously indigenous to New Zealand. The Southern Cross is the constellation that we see. The various colourways, I think, give a reflection of a country that's, you know, surrounded by water. But in the end, everyone will see what they, you know, want to see. It's like beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Thanks. And now let's head to Hornby High for another question down in Christchurch.
Good morning, sir. My name is Jordan. How did you select the panel who determined the short list of the flags?
Yes, a good question. What we did was we tried to say, look, let's take the politics out of this whole process, because I actually don't think changing the flag, believe it or not, is a political issue. I think it's one of those things where New Zealanders should engage on the merits of both the argument and maybe the alternatives. So what we did was we put together a cross-party committee. So we said to every single political party, I wrote to them and said, would you like to come on this, you know, parliamentary committee that would set the framework for how this process would work? And the only party that decided not to join that process was New Zealand First, and so they didn't want to be involved. Then what that committee did was it decided everything. How should the referendum process work? And they just determined who that should be on that committee. And they looked at a range of names. So many of the people on that committee, I don't have any association with, or I don't know them terribly well. So it was chaired by John Burrows, a professor from university. I don't know John prior to that. So there are very few people that I necessarily had any involvement with, and I didn't personally talk to anybody about going on that committee. So it was meant to reflect a range of New Zealanders, a range of interests, a range of experiences. There were historians there, there were sports heroes there, there were people that had Māori cultural knowledge there. There were just a range of different people, and hopefully they could consider the merits of the arguments, which, as I said, were many and varied. And of course they then ran a road show where they went around the country and asked people to give them feedback. Now, some people criticised that and said, well, not that many people turned up. Well, that's true, but in the modern world, actually, people don't turn up so much. What they do is exactly what you and us are doing now, which is, and that is engaging, through a modern medium. People don't tend to go to dusty halls and listen to debates about issues. I can tell you, having been on the election campaign trail for a long time, that's not where they get their information. It will be off their Facebook site, or it will be off some other social media site, or it might be through some other electronic medium, but it's very unlikely to be at a dusty hall. But that was how the process worked. It was sort of just genuinely neutral.
Thanks, Prime Minister. We've got two other questions about the flag that have come in from people watching. And one is from Jordan Lightford at St Bernard's College, which he asks, how did the idea of choosing another flag come to mind? And the second question was from Jack Thompson and Varley McLean and Tom Sue from Ashburton College, who ask, how will the change of the flag affect war veterans and their families of people who died under the current flag?
Yeah, so in terms of changing, this debate's been around, as I said earlier, a very long time. You can go all the way back to Big Norm Kirk talking about the need to change the flag. So it's not new. You might remember some time ago, some of you might be a bit young actually remember this, but if you've done some research you might remember, there was a campaign run by a guy called Lloyd Morrison. And I knew Lloyd quite well. He died, unfortunately. He was quite a young guy and tragically died of, I think, leukemia some years ago. But Lloyd had run a campaign to want to change the flag. And I had always been a bit taken by the view, because as I sort of spent some time researching and thinking about it, I really thought the merits of change were very strong. And so obviously it wasn't something we were going to tackle early on, because we've had some very big issues, and we continue to have some very big issues that we confront as a nation, and they consume the bulk of my time. And so, you know, it wasn't appropriate early on. But later on in the piece, I thought it was an argument that we could, you know, sensibly have as a nation. So in terms of the war veterans, I think, you know, I always say to people, by far the strongest argument I think people put up for not changing is their concern about the impact on our veterans, and if a change was to any way denigrate the service or sacrifice of our brave men and women that have fought and defended this country over a very long period of time. And I would never do anything to undermine that. But interestingly enough, you go back and have a look, up until 1978, if you died in the service of our country, you were buried overseas in the Commonwealth War Grave, and that was the same situation for Australia and Britain and Canada and other countries. So if that happened, and I'm going to Flanders actually in Belgium in a few weeks' time. When you go to those war graves, what you'll see on them is not the New Zealand flag. In fact, what we put on our silver fern, what we put on the headstone was the silver fern as the ultimate symbol of marking someone who paid the ultimate price for their country, and that was the defence of their country that cost their lives. So that's the first point. The second thing is, quite a number of historians have written to me and said it's absolutely true that the silver fern was the symbol we actually used, not the New Zealand flag. So, for instance, a lot of New Zealand prisoner of war, those men, they actually drew the silver fern on their clothing that they had. Our tanks had the silver fern, for instance, on them when they went into war. So, you know, my own personal view is that people don't fight for a flag per se. They fight for the values and principles that underpin a nation. They fight for human rights and women's rights and democracy and freedom. The flag symbolises our nation and hopefully therefore what we believe in. But of itself, they don't fight for a flag per se. Interestingly enough, quite a lot of the military are in favour of change. So I know the RSA isn't, but for instance, even the Governor General, who's ex-SAS and ex-Chief of Defence Force, is publicly on the record saying he's in favour of change. And a great many of the military people I meet, and I was in Iraq very recently, say the same thing to me, that they support change.
Prime Minister, I've just got some extra questions here as well that have been sent in, which I might just ask. Actually, you may have answered this already. One was, if we do change our flag, how will we honour the old flag? Is there anything more you'd like to say about that?
Well, just ultimately, you could always, the law allows you to fly any flag you want. So actually, people could fly the old flag if they actually wanted to, although I think over time, in reality, the new flag would be flown. But the laws will be part of our history, just as the two previous flags prior to this one were. And as I said to you earlier, a lot of people think change is unusual, and that's partly of what makes them hesitant. They say, it's our flag, and so we shouldn't change them, maybe not even aware that it's our third flag. But lots of countries change. You go and have a look and go and Google it, you'll find that there is a lot of countries that have changed their flag. In fact, unusual thing is countries that don't change. That's very rare. But changing is, you know, is far less unusual or frightening than people might think.
Thank you. So we've got a little bit of time now to talk about any other questions that you may have, and we've got a couple besides the flag. So we might go through the schools again and finish up with a couple more questions. So let's head back to Samuel Marsden. Do you have one more question about something else? No questions from Samuel? Okay.
No. Well, you did talk about this earlier, but we still think that there is some apathy among young people about getting involved in political issues, and one example is the flag. So do you have any ideas that we can try to get more young people involved in these type of issues?
Yeah, so I tell you what's interesting. and these just shows you how maybe even misperceptions. But when we first talked about changing the flag, and I gave a speech that's on the record that you can see, I think back in 2013, I think, the end of that year. If you'd come up to me and said, who's going to vote for change and who's going to be hesitant for change, I would have said to you, look, absolutely, young people will be massively in favour of change, and obviously the hardest audience to move will be older people, 65 plus. So why do I think that? Well, just the sheer history, there'll be a greater connection with those older New Zealanders, and the fear of, as say, in some way disrespecting the service of their parents or maybe even their own involvement. Interestingly enough, though, what's been amazing has been the fact that young people, and I've gone to lots of schools and taken sort of straw polls, initially have been very reluctant to change. When you have an argument with them and run through the case, if you like, and make the points, then they're absolutely willing to take all that on board and indicate they want to change. So it's really surprised me, because in Scotland, you may recall last year they had a referendum on whether Scotland should leave the United Kingdom and leave the Union, right? And so what the Scottish government did was it gave 16-year-olds the vote. And the reason it did that was it was convinced that those 16 and 17-year-olds would be much more amenable to change, much more forward-looking, much more prepared to embrace that change. So why do I think it is that it's different? Because it's been quite different, actually. Quite a lot of over 65s are happy to change, and quite a lot of younger people have been, very conservative initially. I think it's because in the modern world, maybe we're just not as engaged in political debate. So a lot of times they don't know all the arguments, and that's why when you can make the argument with them, they change, which is why I said to you early on, if you can do me one favour, whatever it is, A, have the discussion with anyone that you're interested in, your friends, your family. B, go and have a look at that little video clip I did, and if you like it, like it and share it. Even if you don't like it, share it, so that people can get a sense of it. It's had by the way, over 1 million views, and it's reached over 2.1 million people. So there's been a lot of people starting to look at it. But the only way we can get people to fundamentally engage in this debate is if they understand the arguments. And to understand the arguments, we need to get them, actively, that information available to them. And I think just generally for young people, it's a really great thing if you get involved in political discourse, not necessarily just this issue, there's a million things that we do. Because in the end, you're the future leaders of our country. The leadership of our nation, will only rest with me for a short period of time. Eventually, you're going to be the people that are going to take up the reins and be the new prime ministers of our country, and we just need you to be actively involved in all of the arguments that guide us as a country.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask the last question from the emails. And this comes from Makauda College, from Trident High School. And which flag design is your personal favourite?
Well, I like Kyle Lockwood designs. I started life liking the one that was red and blue, and actually now I like the one that's blue and black. So it's personal choice. But I really like that flag. I think one thing I will say is it's hard to imagine the flags when you see them static and you see them on just a little sort of design, if you like. What we really have to do, and I think this is what will happen over time, is when the public ultimately select the flag they want to have to go up against the current New Zealand flag, then it's going to be really important that we develop some good imagery around that to show people what it looks like. And one of the reasons I think Red Peak's captured quite a bit of imagination of people is that the imagery's been quite good. They've had that flag at the top of a mountain. People have been able to see, yeah, okay, I can get a sense of what that would look like and what it would mean. All I can say to you is that if you change, then it will be something that you will embrace and use. And you just go and have a look at anything. Go and have a look at Britain's Got Talent. See what the backdrop is. It's the Union Jack. Go to anything in the United States. See how much they use the stars and stripes. Go and have a look at the Wallabies when they're playing rugby in the weekend in the quarterfinals. You'll see they have the stars of their flag embedded on their shirt. We do not use our flag as a nation, we hardly display it. So if it is so great and such a symbol of New Zealand as we now know it and want the country to be known, we have to ask ourselves the obvious question, why don't we use it? And once you start getting into those arguments, then I think the case for change is very, very strong.
Thanks. I've got 3 extra questions that are not about the flag. And the first is from Joshua Gill and Finn Baker from Hauraki Plains College. And their question was, what makes a good Prime Minister, and how do these qualities benefit New Zealanders, rich or poor, disabled, able, foreign or citizens?
I think the first thing is you have to have a vision for where the country is going and a sense of perspective and fairness which covers all New Zealanders. So I'm not Prime Minister of the people that voted national, I'm Prime Minister of all New Zealanders. Whether they agree or disagree with me, whether they are from any sort of range of different perspectives or issues. And so it's about having balance. And I think, you know, as a government, we try really hard to do that. So, for instance, some people will say, I hate the fact that you've tied the Kermadec up because there's an economic resource there and it might cost New Zealand money. Some people will say, good on you for doing that. New Zealand should have a balance between its economic objectives and its environmental responsibilities. So, I think you have to have some perspective. But secondly, I think, you know, they famously asked Rob Muldoon once, how do you want to leave New Zealand? And he said, in no worse shape than I found it. And I always thought that was just hopelessly unambitious. You know, I think you've got to leave New Zealand in better shape than I found it. That's my goal. And of course, in the end, there'll be a range of views about whether I've achieved that. But that's my view. You've got to have a vision for where you're going, what it is you think you can do. But in the end, it's got to be to empower people. And that's not just a matter of giving them money, actually. That's very much about giving them skills and opportunity and understanding, actually, in the end, people will make the best of their own lives off their own enterprise and effort. You know, in the end, you get out of life what you put into it. The government can't make that happen, but it can facilitate that.
Thanks, Prime Minister. I've got another question from Charlie from Rangitoto College on the North Shore. He's a Year 11 student, and he asks, what do you think New Zealand society is going to be like 20 years from now in terms of its economy, social stability, race relations, and foreign relations? Quite a big question, so there you go.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a little different to what it is today. Economically, we'll definitely be stronger. So what's happening is New Zealand is becoming very much part of Asia, which is the growing part of the world. And ultimately we have got products and services that the world wants. Secondly, ironically, we've always suffered from the tyranny of distance, you know, the last bus stop on the planet a long way away. That is now a big advantage for New Zealand. What I do worry about is what the rest of the world might look like. Having just come back from Iraq, I don't think you have to be the brightest person on the planet to work out that you've got a deeply unstable environment there in the Middle East. You know, it's not just what's happening in Iraq or Syria or Jordan or Lebanon. You know, it's what's happening in Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Egypt and Palestine and Israel. It's a very unstable part of the world, and I think that instability could intensify over time. I think New Zealand will be more electronic, more. I've just come from Griffin's today, where I've opened their new production line, and it's full of robots and different, you know, world-leading technology. Doesn't mean it doesn't employ people, but they do different jobs. You come from the biggest school in the country at Rangitoto, with well over 4,000 students. I'm sure if you look around your school for about more than 2 seconds, you'll notice that it's very multicultural. Well, that's the face of modern New Zealand. And I always say to people, you know, we're a country off a bicultural base of Maori and British settlers, but we're now a multicultural society. And personally, I think that makes New Zealand a lot more interesting and a better place to live.
Thank you. And 2 final questions, one tough and one not so tough. One from the Tolaga Bay Area School and Kahuku-Ranui students. You may not be able to do this briefly. It's, can you explain TPPA and what purpose it will serve our country? And then the more important question, well, it's not the more important question, who do you think will win the Rugby World Cup?
Okay, so let's start back with the World Cup. I still think the Mighty All Blacks will get there. Personally, I think they're actually going to take France apart on Saturday, so Sunday our time. I might be wrong, but I just think that it's not a terribly great French side. I think the All Blacks will fire, so that's my view. And I think they'll end up playing the Wallabies in the final and beat them. That's a good news story there. TPP, actually, we can explain it relatively simply. Think about it from this perspective. New Zealand's a small country. We're at the bottom of the earth. No one owes us a living. We make products the rest of the world wants to buy, and the greatest way to do that is have access to those markets. The TPP is about 12 countries. They represent 40% of the global economy, and as a result of TPP, 93% of those goods will have tariff-free access into those nations. So if you think about it in very simple terms, let's say you have a sirloin steak and it costs $10 and you sell it into Japan today, you'll pay $14.80 for that steak. Why? Because $4.80 of it goes to the government in the form of a tariff because they're trying to physically discourage Japanese consumers from buying that product. And so by removing that, obviously you become much more price competitive. So we have always done amazingly well out of free trade. To give you one idea, China, when they modelled it, they thought the tariff reductions were worth 115 million, and the behind-the-scenes costs benefits were about $1 billion. TPP is 259 million reduction tariffs, and about 3 billion behind the scenes. So it's about 2.5 times the size of the China FTA, which is now our largest market. So a quarter of the entire worldwide household consumption happens in the United States. And this would be New Zealand's opportunity to have a free trade agreement with, amongst other countries, the USA. So it's massively beneficial to New Zealand.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We're out of time, and so I'd like to firstly say a very big thank you to these teachers and students from Samuel Marsden, from James Cook, and from Hornby High, and to certainly watching live who submitted questions. I hope you have enjoyed this discussion. And lastly, thank you to the Prime Minister, and a few final words.
Well, Ross, thanks very much. As I said, we were really keen to engage with young people. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity, and I hope we can do it again on other topics, you know, as wide-ranging as you like. We live in a modern, exciting, I think, globally connected New Zealand, and having a Google Hangout's just another way of us, reaching out to people and engaging and getting a sense of what New Zealanders think. So, thanks very much. Thanks for your interest, and whatever your view on the flag, I hope you're enjoying the debate and can see the merits of the arguments both ways. In the end, New Zealand will decide, and that's what makes this a fantastic country. So, have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And so thank you for everyone who's tuned in live to Google Hangouts and to YouTube. This will be available on YouTube as well. Thank you very much for coming, and have a great day. Thanks. Bye.